right, so get ready to dust off those old VHS tapes, because today we're taking a deep dive into Doug. This isn't just like a nostalgia trip, though.
No, right.
We're going beyond the catchy theme song.
Yeah.
And, exploring why this seemingly simple cartoon about an average kid left such a lasting mark on animation.
Well, what's fascinating about Doug is that it arrived at a pivotal moment, in the history of children's television. The early 90s saw a real shift away from the purely slapstick-driven cartoons that, dominated the 80s.
Yeah.
Shows like Rugrats and Rocko's Modern Life were starting to, explore more complex themes and emotions. But Doug took it a step further.
It seems like, there was a real hunger for this kind of storytelling.
Yeah.
Was it just a coincidence, or was there something, bigger going on culturally?
It's definitely no coincidence.
Okay.
The rise of these more nuanced cartoons mirrored a broader cultural shift happening in the early 90s. There was this, growing awareness of diversity, a desire to see authentic representations on screen, and a recognition that, children, too, have complex inner lives worth exploring.
Yeah.
Doug captured that perfectly by zeroing in on everyday life.
Yeah.
School anxieties, navigating friendships, first crushes, experiences that resonated with kids regardless of their background.
And that's what always struck me about Doug. It wasn't about saving the world or, going on crazy adventures.
Yeah.
It was about the little moments, those seemingly insignificant experiences that make up, childhood.
And by focusing on these relatable moments, Doug achieved something truly groundbreaking.
Yeah.
It allowed kids to see themselves in the main character, to feel seen and understood in a way that many cartoons, before it hadn't really attempted.
But lots of shows try to be relatable.
Yeah.
What do you think it was about Doug specifically that made it so effective at connecting with viewers?
Well, take the episode where Doug freezes up during the school play. It's not just played for laughs.
Right.
The show actually delves into, Doug's anxiety, his fear of judgment, and the way those feelings can be, paralyzing. That kind of emotional honesty was rare to see in a cartoon at the time.
You're right.
Yeah.
I remember watching that episode and feeling this sense of relief, like, oh, someone else gets it.
Right.
It normalized those feelings of insecurity that I think every kid experiences.
And that's a testament to the show's commitment to, nuanced character development. The characters weren't just one-dimensional archetypes. They had flaws, insecurities, moments of jealousy and kindness. Even Roger Klotz, the quintessential bully, had moments where, you saw glimpses of vulnerability.
Even Skeeter, Doug's best friend, wasn't just a goofy sidekick.
Yeah.
He had his own insecurities and anxieties, which made their friendship feel that much more authentic.
Right.
It was like the show acknowledged that even close friends have different struggles and ways of coping.
Exactly. And that complexity extended to the female characters as well. Patty Mayonnaise wasn't just the stereotypical popular girl.
Right.
She had athletic talent, she cared about her grades, and she showed genuine compassion for others. These were well-rounded characters that kids could identify with on multiple levels.
And of course, we can't forget about Doug's superhero alter ego,
Yeah.
Quailman.
Right.
Underwear over pants, the quail signal.
Yeah.
It was so wonderfully silly. Was that just for laughs, or was there something more to Quailman?
Quailman is a brilliant example of how Doug could be both hilarious and insightful at the same time.
Yeah.
On the surface, he's this, goofy, almost absurd character. But if you look closer, Quailman embodies something really universal, that childhood desire to escape into fantasy, to imagine ourselves with superpowers, especially when facing real-life anxieties.
Like, who hasn't wished they could just quail call for help when they're feeling overwhelmed or powerless?
Yeah.
It taps into that deep-seated need for a heroic solution, even if it's just in our imaginations.
And the brilliance of Quailman is that he never actually solves Doug's problems.
Oh, interesting.
Doug still has to face his fears and figure things out for himself. Quailman is more of a coping mechanism, a way for Doug to process his emotions and find the courage to, face reality.
That's a great point. It's like the show is saying it's okay to daydream and imagine yourself as a superhero, but ultimately you have to be your own hero in the real world.
And that message, I think, is part of why Doug resonated so deeply with viewers. It acknowledged the power of imagination while still grounding itself in the reality of growing up.
So we've talked about the relatable characters, the exploration of everyday anxieties, and even the symbolism behind a superhero in underwear.
Right.
Is it safe to say that Doug wasn't just a show?
Yeah.
It was a reflection of the times, a cultural touchstone for a generation navigating the complexities of growing up in the 90s.
Absolutely. Doug captured something unique about that era. It reflected the changing social landscape, the desire for more authentic representation, and the growing awareness of, children's inner lives. But beyond that, it tapped into something timeless. The universal experiences of childhood, the awkwardness, the insecurities, the triumphs, and the friendships that shape who we become.
And before we move on, I have to ask about the animation style.
Right.
It's so distinctive.
Right.
The simple lines, the limited color palette, the almost hand-drawn look.
Yeah.
Was that just a stylistic choice, or was there something more, deliberate at play?
It was definitely a deliberate choice and a very smart one.
Okay.
Jim Jenkins, the creator of Doug, wanted the show to have a certain feel and intimacy that set it apart from other cartoons. That sketchy, almost homemade look was meant to feel accessible and relatable, almost like Doug was drawing, his own life story.
It almost feels like you're peering into Doug's journal, like you're experiencing these moments alongside him.
Exactly. And that stylistic choice perfectly complemented the show's overall message. That beauty and meaning can be found in the ordinary, in the everyday moments that, make up a life.
Okay, so we've established that Doug was groundbreaking in its storytelling and visual style.
Yeah.
But did it have a lasting impact? Did it influence the world of animation beyond its own run?
Oh, absolutely. Doug was a pioneer in so many ways. It paved the way for a wave of animated shows that followed in its footsteps, proving that cartoons could be funny, heartfelt, and emotionally intelligent all at the same time. But to really understand its impact, we need to dig a little deeper and look at, specific examples. And that's where we'll pick up in part 2. When you look at the landscape of, children's animation after Doug, it's impossible to ignore its influence.
Yeah.
Shows like Arthur and the Magic School Bus, which premiered in the mid-90s,
Right.
picked up the torch in a way, focusing on relatable storylines and incorporating educational elements, but in a way that felt organic and engaging.
That's interesting. It's like they took the foundation that Doug laid, that focus on, everyday life and emotional honesty, and applied it to different genres.
Right.
Arthur, with its exploration of school and family dynamics, felt like a direct descendant of Doug in some ways.
Exactly. And the Magic School Bus took that same, relatable approach and used it to make science exciting and accessible for kids.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about memorizing facts. It was about experiencing science through the eyes of, Miss Frizzle and her students going on these wild, imaginative adventures that made learning fun.
But Doug aired on Nickelodeon and later on Disney.
Right.
Were those networks trying to create an entire block of programming with this new kind of animation?
While there was definitely a noticeable trend towards more sophisticated children's programming, it wasn't necessarily a coordinated effort by the networks. It was more of a response to a changing cultural landscape and a growing demand for content that resonated with both kids and parents.
Yeah.
Doug proved that animation could be more than just, silly entertainment. It could be a powerful tool for storytelling and emotional connection.
And its influence wasn't limited to educational shows, was it?
Right.
Even shows with more fantastical elements seem to draw inspiration from Doug's approach to, character development and emotional depth.
Absolutely. Look at a show like Steven Universe, which premiered much later in 2013.
Yeah.
It's a sci-fi fantasy with, magical creatures and intergalactic battles, but at its core, it's a story about relationships, identity, and the power of empathy. It took Doug's emphasis on emotional honesty and applied it to a completely different genre, creating something truly special.
It's like Steven Universe took the blueprint from Doug and amplified it, exploring, complex themes like grief, trauma, and the importance of found family, but always with a sense of humor and hope.
Precisely. And that's what's so remarkable about Doug's legacy. It didn't just spawn a few copycat shows. It shifted the entire paradigm of what children's animation could be, proving that it was a medium capable of telling stories that were both entertaining and emotionally resonant.
It's funny, when we were kids watching Doug, we probably didn't realize we were witnessing a turning point in animation history.
Right.
We were just enjoying the show, connecting with the characters, and maybe learning a few life lessons along the way.
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
The best shows, the ones that truly resonate, manage to entertain and enlighten without ever feeling preachy or condescending.
Right.
They meet you where you are, invite you into their world, and leave you feeling like you've gained something valuable, even if it's just a smile or a moment of, reflection.
Okay, before we get too philosophical, circle.
Yeah.
Can we circle back to Doug for a moment?
Yeah.
I'm curious about the show's move from Nickelodeon to Disney.
Right.
That had to be a significant event, both for the show and for its fans.
The move to Disney was definitely a major turning point for Doug.
Mm-hmm.
Some fans were worried that the show would lose its edge, that it would become overly sanitized under the Disney umbrella. But surprisingly, Doug managed to retain its charm and its heart, even with a few, cosmetic changes.
I remember there being some, minor controversy at the time. Some felt the later seasons lacked the same level of depth and maybe even a touch of cynicism that the Nickelodeon seasons possessed.
There were definitely some noticeable differences, but it's hard to say whether the move to Disney actually diminished the show's quality or if it was simply a, natural evolution. Even on Nickelodeon, Doug had matured over time, the storylines becoming a bit more complex, the characters grappling with more, mature themes.
Right.
The move to Disney might have simply accelerated that process.
It's interesting to consider how the show might have evolved differently had it stayed on Nickelodeon. Do you think it would have continued to push boundaries to explore even more complex themes?
Yeah.
Or would it have eventually run its course? That's a great question. And honestly, it's impossible to say for sure. It's like speculating on alternate timelines.
Yeah. But I do think it speaks to the show's adaptability that it was able to transition to a new network and still find an audience. It shows that Doug had something special, something that transcended network boundaries. And, one of the things that made Doug so adaptable, so able to resonate with a wide audience was its creator, Jim Jenkins. He poured so much of himself into the show, drawing from his own childhood experiences growing up in Richmond, Virginia.
It's fascinating how personal experiences can become universal stories.
Yeah.
Did Jenkins ever talk about what inspired him to create Doug?
He did.
Okay.
Jenkins has said that Doug was a way for him to explore the anxieties and awkwardness of adolescence, to capture those feelings of, not quite fitting in, of trying to figure out who you are. He wanted to create a character that kids could relate to, someone who was just as flawed and insecure as they were.
And it's clear that those personal touches resonated with viewers.
Right.
Like the episode where Doug and Skeeter visit the Bluffington Funny, which was based on a real amusement park Jenkins went to as a kid.
Yeah.
It added this layer of authenticity to the show.
Right.
Like you were getting a glimpse into Jenkins' own memories.
And beyond the, specific places and experiences, Jenkins' personality shines through in the show's overall tone and sensibility, that gentle humor, that warmth and empathy towards the characters, that celebration of the ordinary. It all reflects Jenkins' own worldview.
We've talked a lot about the writing and the characters, but I think Doug's visual style deserves, a deeper dive too.
Right.
That simple, almost hand-drawn animation was so unique for its time.
Yeah.
It felt like a deliberate departure from the slick commercial animation that was becoming more prevalent in the 90s.
It absolutely was a deliberate choice.
Yeah.
Jenkins wanted to create a look that felt personal and intimate, almost like you were watching a child's drawing come to life.
Right.
And that limited color palette, those sketched lines, they actually heightened the show's emotional impact. It allowed the, characters' expressions and the story's themes to take center stage.
It's funny, right? Because in a way, it was a very sophisticated approach disguised as simplicity.
Right.
It wasn't about dazzling viewers with flashy animation.
Yeah.
It was about inviting them into Doug's world, making them feel like they were part of his story.
Exactly. And that's a testament to Jenkins' artistic vision. He understood that sometimes less is more by stripping away the unnecessary flourishes.
Right.
He created a style that was both timeless and emotionally resonant.
Okay, we can't rack up this deep dive without talking about Doug's theme song.
Right.
So catchy, so upbeat.
Yeah.
So perfectly captures the spirit of the show. Was there a particular strategy behind the music for Doug?
Music played a huge role in establishing the show's identity. The theme song, composed by Fred Newman, is a masterpiece of 90s nostalgia.
Right.
It's whimsical, playful, and instantly recognizable. But beyond the theme song, the show's soundtrack was carefully curated to enhance the emotional impact of each scene.
You're right. It's not just background music.
Right.
It's integral to the storytelling.
Yeah.
Helping to set the mood, build tension, and amplify the characters' emotions.
And a lot of the music was original, composed specifically for the show, which was unusual for a cartoon at the time.
Okay.
It showed a level of commitment to quality and artistry that really elevated Doug above its peers.
So, as we near the end of our time together, What do you think is the most important thing for our listener to take away from this deep dive into Doug?
Mm-hmm.
What is it about this seemingly simple cartoon that continues to resonate with audiences, even decades later?
I think Doug reminds us of the power of empathy, of seeing the well through someone else's eyes. Yeah.
Finding beauty in the ordinary.
Yeah.
It's a sheer it celebrates kindness, authenticity, and the importance of staying true to yourself.
Right.
Even when you feel like you don't quite fit in.
Yeah.
And it does all of this with humor, heart, and a genuine respect for its audience.
It's a powerful reminder that the best stories, the ones that truly endure, are often the ones that speak to our shared, human experience. They're the stories that make us laugh, make us think,
Right.
and ultimately make us feel a little less alone in the world.
And Doug,
Yeah.
with its relatable characters, its heartwarming stories, and its timeless message of hope, is a perfect example of a show that achieves all of that and more.
It's been a real pleasure taking this deep dive with you.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thanks for sharing your insights and helping us appreciate Doug on a whole new level.
It was my pleasure. And for our listener out there, I encourage you to, revisit Doug, maybe even share it with a younger generation.
Its message of kindness and self-acceptance is just as relevant today as it was back in the 90s.
And who knows, you might even find yourself humming that catchy theme song long after the credits roll. Until next time, keep on diving.